She took her friend's shift at the coffee shop, unaware the customer she spilled coffee on was a CEO looking for a wife. "It's scorching hot coffee," Olivia Hayes said, voice trembling, gesturing helplessly toward the spreading stain on the man's expensive gray suit. Her hand hovered in midair as if frozen in time, clutching a stack of napkins she'd instinctively grabbed before realizing she shouldn't touch him. Her heart thudded wildly, echoing like a drumline inside her chest. The man before her, tall, commanding, with neatly parted dark hair and a crisp jawline, turned slowly, as though each second of delay was building to an eruption. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was my fault. Please let me pay for the cleaning," she offered, her voice small but sincere. He stared at her, his jaw tightening, his entire frame rigid. "This is a $3,000 suit," he snapped, biting each word off as if tasting their bitterness. The cafe stilled. Every voice seemed to hush. Mugs halted mid-sip. A baby's cry paused in curiosity. The warm, golden light from the windows dimmed beneath clouds that moved in quickly, casting faint shadows over the barista counter where Olivia stood, panic mounting in her chest. "Sorry doesn't clean Armani," he added, his tone ice-cold. Olivia flinched. Her instinct to apologize again curled on her tongue, but she stopped herself. She took a slow breath, eyes briefly shutting against the burn of tears she refused to let fall in front of this stranger. Not today. Not after everything else she had endured. When she looked up, her voice steadied, though still quiet. "You're right. If I could go back 5 seconds, I would. But I can't. All I can do now is mean it, and I do. I'm sorry." She held his gaze, her cheeks flushed. Her hair, once tied neatly, had fallen loose in the rush of the morning. There was no drama in her voice, no excuse, just plain regret. The man's expression faltered. Something in the way she stood, unapologetically sorry, not pathetic, made him hesitate. His anger, so ready to explode, cooled like steam lifting from a coffee lid. He exhaled and culled a handkerchief from his coat pocket, patting at the suit's lapel, the stark brown against the light gray wool. Olivia watched, the air between them heavy with the kind of tension that could bend metal. He glanced at her name tag, Olivia, the daily grind, and she straightened as he read it. He didn't know she had taken the shift for a sick friend, didn't know she'd been laid off from her library job 3 weeks ago, didn't know she'd cried last night alone in a tiny studio apartment wondering how to pay rent, or that this job, this one chaotic barista shift was all she had to grasp that morning. He didn't know any of it, but he saw something. He folded the handkerchief, nodded faintly, then pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. "I'll have it cleaned," he said, his voice no longer biting. "Accidents happen." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Be careful next time. That was hot." Olivia blinked, her throat tightened as she nodded. "Yes, sir. Thank you." He left. The glass door swung shut behind him with a soft hiss. She stood there, the card in her hand, watching the space he had filled a moment before. Something shifted inside her, some mixture of embarrassment, relief, and curiosity. Why hadn't he exploded? Why hadn't he called for her manager? Her fingers curled around the edge of the counter as she replayed the moment, his words the flash of something softer behind his frustration. A few minutes later, she saw movement outside the window. He was still there, standing beside the cafe awning. He pulled something from his pocket, his receipt. He scribbled on the back with a pen, folded it neatly, slipped it into his wallet, then disappeared down the street. Olivia exhaled, confused by the hollow ache his absence left behind. Her coworker passed by. "Are you okay?" she answered automatically. Then, after a pause, "I think so." The rest of her shift passed in a blur of orders, milk frothing and sticky syrup bottles. But her mind kept circling back to him, to the man with the ruined suit who hadn't truly yelled, who had, in the end, extended a measure of grace. She didn't know his name, didn't know she'd see him again, didn't know that this small disaster would become the spark to a story far bigger than either of them imagined. But as she wiped the counter and helped the next customer, her hands no longer shook. Because that morning, something had shifted, not just in him but in her. And sometimes it takes one clumsy moment, one scalding cup of coffee for the heart to finally start warming up again. Ethan Cole sat alone in his corner office on the top floor of Cole Industries. New York City's skyline sprawled behind him in quiet majesty. The windows stretched floor to ceiling, casting the late afternoon sun across the room in golden slants, but Ethan barely noticed. His eyes were locked on a legal document spread across his desk. The words blurred as his jaw clenched tighter. A deadline. 60 days. That was all he had before everything he had worked for, his company, his legacy, was pulled from beneath him. Not because of failure, not because of market collapse, but because of a clause inserted into his father's will years ago, triggered now by the board. If Ethan wasn't married by the end of the quarter, Coal Industries would merge with Sterling Global, his father's old rival, a hostile takeover disguised as a merger. His hands curled into fists. He had spent the last decade reshaping the company from the ground up. Late nights, ruthless negotiations, sacrificing friendships, relationships, his own health, and now they were telling him he needed a wife to keep it all. He stood abruptly, the leather of his chair creaking behind him. Crossing the room, he looked out over the city, a sea of steel and possibility. He had been through every route. The elite matchmakers, heiresses, ambitious executives, influencers, yet none of them had felt right. All of them saw the CEO, the fortune, the image. Not one had bothered to ask who Ethan Cole really was beneath the suit. His phone buzzed, a message from his assistant. Another cancellation for tonight's dinner match. Confirm reschedule? Ethan stared at the screen for a long beat, then typed back, "No, cancel everything." He sat back down and leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. A wild idea stirred in the back of his mind, one that until now he had brushed aside as irrational, but desperation had a way of peeling back logic. What if he didn't need someone from his world? What if the right person wasn't on the guest list of some private event, but somewhere real, authentic? And then his mind returned to the girl at the coffee shop, Olivia Hayes, the blonde barista with wide, steady eyes and hands that trembled but didn't beg. She had ruined his suit, yes, but she hadn't tried to win his favor. Her apology had been genuine, her dignity intact, and for reasons he still couldn't articulate, she had stayed with him all day. He didn't know who he was. That mattered more than he realized. He picked up the phone. "Sarah," he said when his assistant answered, "I want to set up a new assistant interview." Sarah hesitated. "A replacement? You just renewed Maria's contract last week." "It's not about Maria. This is different. I want you to find the girl who works mornings at the Daily Grind. Blonde, 20-something. I spilled coffee on my suit there." Silence. Then, cautiously, "Sir, are you suggesting we hire a barista?" He said, "Set up a discreet interview. Bring her in as a temp, just for a trial period." Sarah paused again. Understood. He hung up, fingers steepled under his chin. He knew he was reckless, unprofessional, possibly unethical, but he also knew this. In that chaotic moment at the cafe, for the first time in months, someone had looked at him and not seen a CEO. They saw a man with coffee on his suit, and somehow that had felt honest. He didn't need someone to fit a mold. He needed someone who could see beyond it. Whether Olivia would say yes to the offer, he didn't know. Whether she could play along long enough for the board to back off, even less certain. But one thing Ethan Cole understood better than anyone else in the business world. Sometimes the best deals were made when you stepped outside the contract. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't part of a deal at all. Maybe she was the miracle clause he never saw coming. Olivia Hayes walked into the gleaming lobby of Coal Industries with a knot twisting in her stomach. She had no idea why she had been invited to interview for a temporary assistant role, especially when she had no background in corporate and had submitted no resume. But the offer had come through a formal call, and her instinct, for some reason she couldn't name, had told her to say yes. She adjusted the collar of her borrowed blazer, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, she was led into an office that looked more like a luxury suite than a workspace. Glass walls, curated art, and a view of New York City that stretched to the harbor. And there he was, the man from the coffee shop. Ethan Cole stood behind his desk, hands clasped, expression unreadable. He didn't mention the coffee, didn't mention the incident. He simply nodded, then gestured to the seat across from him. "Miss Hayes, thank you for coming." "I still don't understand why," she replied, careful, but not impolite. "I've never worked in an office. I'm not really... You glanced around. This. I need someone who can think quickly, speak honestly, and who's not intimidated by a title, he said simply. Olivia tilted her head. You got all that from me spilling coffee on you? A small twitch of amusement pulled at the corner of his mouth. It was a memorable introduction. She blinked, then slowly smiled. I guess it was. From that day, Olivia became Ethan's temporary assistant, but unlike anyone who'd worked for him before, she didn't try to impress, she didn't flatter, she didn't linger for approval. She asked direct questions, she challenged unnecessary tasks. She made coffee that was too strong and corrected him when he barked orders at staff without eye contact. I know you're the boss, but people work better when they feel seen, she told him once during a staff meeting. Ethan had stared at her, speechless for a moment. No one ever spoke to him like that, and yet it started with longer hours. What began as a standard assistant role stretched into late-night strategy sessions, last-minute client dinners, and two-person brainstorms in Ethan's office over takeout containers and open laptops. Olivia adapted without complaint. She grew sharper, faster, more intuitive about what Ethan needed before he even asked. And somewhere between spreadsheet edits and coffee breaks, the space between them began to shrink. They worked in sync too well for it to go unnoticed. Do you two ever disagree? Sarah, his executive secretary, asked once with a raised eyebrow. Only about the definition of good coffee, Olivia quipped, and Ethan, standing behind her, chuckled. Their next trip was a 2-day business conference in Chicago. Ethan typically traveled alone, but this time he invited Olivia. Officially, she was there to take notes and manage his schedule. Unofficially, he wasn't sure he wanted to go without her. The flight was smooth, the meeting successful. Compliments rolled in from clients who noticed a new softness in Ethan's tone, a new calm in his body language. She's good for you, one investor said in passing. Ethan had opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. He wasn't ready to define what this was or what it could become. At the airport, on their way back, the terminal buzzed with delays. Thunderstorms rolled across the East Coast. Flights were grounded and tension hung thick in the air. That's when they heard the crying. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5, stood near a trash can, sobbing uncontrollably. No parent in sight. People passed him without stopping. Ethan hesitated, but Olivia was already walking toward the child. She knelt beside him. Hey, sweetheart, are you okay? Are you lost? The boy sniffled, nodded, wiped his face with a sleeve. What's your name? Tyler. Okay, Tyler, she said gently. We're going to find your mom or dad, all right? You're not alone. She stayed with him, calming him, asking soft questions while Ethan flagged airport security. Within minutes, a panicked mother came rushing over, crying as she hugged her son. Olivia smiled and stepped back, her hand still gently resting on the boy's back until he was safe in his mother's arms. Ethan watched the whole thing from a few feet away, something tightening in his chest. When they finally boarded the late flight home, the cabin lights were dimmed, and Olivia fell asleep with her head against the window. Ethan sat beside her, hands clasped, his thoughts tangled. The way she had spoken to that boy, patient, kind, natural. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't even looked around to see if anyone else would help. She just moved, like someone who was meant to care for others. He stared at her profile, her blonde hair tousled against her cheek, her breathing even, and for a brief, foolish moment, he let himself imagine a future with her in it. Later that week, back in New York City, another storm hit. Offices closed early, but Olivia stayed behind to help him finish a board report. Rain battered the windows, the city blurred behind glass. By 10 p.m., the streets were flooded, the subway stalled, and her phone buzzed with alerts. You're not going out in that, Ethan said firmly. I'll call a cab. but no cabs were available. "Olivia, you'll stay here," he said, quieter now. "We've got a guest suite on the executive floor." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. Later, over leftover Thai food and soft jazz playing from his Bluetooth speaker, they sat on the office couch, the lights low, the storm muffled behind the glass. It felt strangely domestic, almost like home. Olivia laughed at something he said, wiping a bit of sauce from her lip. He watched her, heart pounding for no logical reason. The air between them shifted. Then she looked up at him, really looked, and the room stilled. She leaned in slightly. So did he. Their faces inches apart, breath shared, and then Ethan stopped. He pulled back, barely. Olivia blinked, confused. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, voice thick with something unsaid. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft, searching. He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to, but something in him, guilt, fear, shame, coiled like a knot in his chest. She didn't know the truth, that this job had been a setup, that he hadn't hired her purely for her skills, that she was never just an assistant, not to the board, not to his plan. He didn't want the moment to be built on a lie. Olivia leaned back slowly, smile fading just slightly. She didn't push, didn't ask, but something in her eyes changed, a flicker of uncertainty, and Ethan felt it like a fracture in something fragile. He stared out at the rain, fists clenched in his lap, and knew the time for truth was coming soon because his feelings were no longer part of the plan. They were real, and so was the risk of losing her. The office was quiet that Friday afternoon. Most of the staff had left early for the weekend, and the hum of rain against the windows made the space feel more soft, more intimate. Olivia had stayed behind to help organize the files Ethan needed for Monday's board review. She sat at his desk, sorting through a stack of folders, when a notification pinged on his monitor. Ethan had left for a quick call downstairs, and the email popped up innocently, a subject line in bold, "Prenup draft, Plan B confirmation, Olivia Hayes." At first, she didn't register it. Her eyes skimmed, then locked in confusion. She opened the message, half expecting it to be spam, but it wasn't. The sender was Ethan's attorney. The message was brief, to the point, attached with a draft of a prenup agreement, and in it, words that stabbed her in the chest. Should the original arrangement with candidate A fall through, proceed to implement contingency agreement with Miss Olivia Hayes. Her employment and proximity provide a seamless transition into the required public narrative. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. She read the lines again. Plan B. Not love, not even trust, just convenience. The office suddenly felt colder. She stood, the chair scraping back behind her, heart pounding. She grabbed her bag, not caring about the mess left behind, and moved toward the elevator, but not before Ethan stepped through the door. He stopped short, surprised. "Olivia, what's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes glistened, locked on his. "You really thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you?" she said, voice tight with fury barely contained. Ethan's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The prenup," she said flatly. "The email from your lawyer. Plan B, Olivia Hayes." Ethan froze. The silence between them was immediate and deafening. "Olivia, I can explain." "No," she snapped, holding up a trembling hand. "Don't do that. Don't insult me further by pretending this wasn't calculated. You hired me knowing exactly who I was. You tested me, observed me. You let me believe this thing between us was real." His face paled. "It is real. It became real." She laughed bitterly. "Right, after I passed whatever internal checklist you had for a wife. I was just convenient, accessible. Olivia, that's not true. Then what is true? Her voice cracked. That I was second choice? That you chose me after someone else said no? Ethan stepped forward, hands raised slightly, but she backed away. I let myself believe in you. I defended you when people said you were cold, calculating. I thought they were wrong, but they were right. Olivia, she cut him off, her eyes burning. You looked at me and saw a solution, not a person. I was just a plan, Ethan, a plan you dressed up with late nights and gentle smiles and coffee runs. But it was always a lie. He was silent, his mouth slightly open, the weight of her pain landing like blows. I don't want your money, she said quietly. I don't want your apology. I don't want anything from you. Please, he said, the word raw. She shook her head, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. You don't get to say please. Not now. Then she turned. Ethan didn't move. He didn't chase her. He stood there, rooted in the ruins of his own making, watching the only woman who had ever seen through his walls walk out of his life. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, and he was alone. Ethan Cole sat in his office with the blinds drawn and the lights off, the New York City skyline outside fading into gray dusk. For the past 3 days, he had barely spoken a word to anyone. Meetings were postponed, emails went unanswered. He stared at screens, at documents,